Okay, I just sent it. Everyone let me know when you're good. Emory, did you get it? And then Jen, are you good? Thank you. Okay, sweet. I'm starting 1 for like 8:30 to read the plans. When that goes off, I'm not done yet. Advantage 1 is local news deserts are rising due to industry consolidation that collapses the whole news ecosystem, imperiling democracy, social cohesion, disaster response, political accountability, and creating geographic and political polarization. Now is key to address underlying issues in the market. Abernathy 20 coronavirus issues that undermine local journalists and this year determine the future local news or actions in actual CTC should local newspapers or news. The federal government could address underlying issues, contributing news censorship, censorship, establish also local news, and if fiction for democracy, what the worst new place to have a local journalists disappear, consolidation increase. You'll also anyone have new places leaving anti-trust news without any local newspapers, both community trust and democracy. They send agenda for debate policy issues, history, editorials, advertising, and the encourage racial growth by helping local business connect consumers, nurture social cohesion, political participation, putting local context, may see national 85% of news originates with new press from native national state papers relied heavily on journals and not as local papers, hometown papers, just view the news consistency, coronavirus, project focus, critical local news space during emergencies, disseminating authoritative info, discrediting misinfo, residency, access to info, to make wise decision from any local paper source of news with the community loses paper coverage, local government declared transparency officially also claim because they less important key issues like livelihood news, distributed culture, economic, political advice, government spend on local newspaper, identify contain public health crises, hedge funds, CE groups, commercial newspapers, because not performance to solution journals, relation to innovation, consolidated, shifted editorial decisions, corporations, outside communities where papers located, media barriers, laid off staff, reduced benefits, profits, used to be dividends, exchange, usual half a total circulation, there's no choice, seriously around journalistic decisions, classes, turnover, weak response to news organization, communities, leaks, and news scissors, and ghost newspapers, robustness of the democratic model, containment of populist impulses are key to global governance, preventing nuclear war close check, and 21, the liberal robots we contain populism must be paid to use to regain its roles, later liberal coalition to Russia, Chinese aggressions, responsibility, democracy, taking over all communities, factor nuclear war, deterrence, still feasible, preserve democratic rule, cooperation, if necessary, low shore of nuclear confrontation, populism is an independent existential risk and magnifies all others, late 21 humanity, but become a secret super intelligence by terror, totalitarianism, natural pandemic thing about Jesus is skewed by availability bias in this environment, publicity, politics, is conflict between elites and people, populist critique institutions, internationalism, and political by fabric systems, success sidelines, North climate change, nuclear war says the biggest risk is an act virus, combined infection, test of deadliness, extreme development, plague versus the plague, climate change, running the planet uninhabitable, new nuclear powers with hedges, including nuclear catastrophe, super intelligence, spell disaster, unknown knows could be looking, tackling as racism, political problem values for determined lives, populist dispersion, community survival, populist enemy, undershifts, and long-term threats, bad this doesn't just exasperate other dangers and risk factor in itself, no totalitarian turn, the alternative isn't about favor one size, about decisions based and if not emotion and independent, unconcentrated media is pivotal in preventing both public and private corruption. She saw in 19 media is a pivotal role in anti-corruption offers info about governmental business activities, preventing public capacity to hold those in power accountable, increasing the political risk of those exposed to faster windows and people research just relationship between media freedom, plurality, corruption, journalists working competitive, plural, low media markets have a strong subject and cover stories of private and public sector corruption, hinders misuse of resources, challenges with media's watchdog, nuclear government official consolidation, media ownership, critical media coverage of corruption cases, guilt of media effects, investigation, presentation, legislation, separate access are necessary, most fairness, independence, concentration has become a major concern. Declining public accountability increases default risk that spikes municipal bond yields, gout at all, zoning shortage, never reporting associated with lack of accountability, waste, corruption, journalists, improving governance, exposed throughout even the threat case entities, a check of closure, least inefficiencies, and for friction, municipal wonders, the entire use of compensate hair costs suggest alternative media not substitutes inefficiency associated default risk. Determining yields new papers most relied upon this as apart from other sources. Closure relies increased info backing lead to reduce efficiency. Public finance outcomes deteriorate following closure. Corruption went on track. Lack of coverage just to worsen outcomes. Less for voters or participation. Lack of engagement. Comprehensive monitoring of officials, leaders, and higher use to compensate for a lesser known borrower. Unlocks capacity capital for resilient infrastructure extinction and stops mega city class partridge. And 19 US as one of the largest cover for price commitment base cities have been on a local level demonstrates federalism and individual cities are creating online heights, climbing on track as very challenges, including infrastructure vulnerabilities. Great infrastructure is key. Resilience infrastructure is poor with a strong risk of failure, full capacity while facing demands for climate impacts. Most cities barely funding resource financing would build green economy. This is as usual. It faces disaster bonds and locking finance for efficiency, forestry, sustainable water. Cities look to low cost, long-term capital bonds can be powerful. The question is whether such are competitive bonds are crucial to scale up. Ripple effects from escalating failures cause extinction and turnover impact. Pamela and Armstrong 15 risk of human civilization infrastructure. Critical infrastructure small disruption cause a highly nonlinear effect. North are strongly coupled intensification by globalization, will governance team inadequate failure cascade brought by ongoing cyber conflict trigger social class priority coercion to initial structure sector effects such as conflict or starvation cause great death and suffering, collapse of threat and undermine combating ecosystem, class, social trade, poverty, wars, competition, monoculture, shocks, collapse, mega cities, exchanging grid, 19 cities, or disasters waiting reliant on imported energies. Large failure causes chaos, even single collapse represents existential risk, failure, phenomenal consequences for all neighbors and collapse. No borders, refugees, mega city collapses, probable outcome of failures, energy supply collapse, and shock was due to the global food, other essential outcomes such as disease and wars are likely. Local news is key, is more trusted and connected to communities, and national news often Hussein. I don't make cultures have unparalleled access to and awareness of local issues and cover stories. National journalists does not have the network to identify their substitute. America's value trust local news about national polarization, fraudulent news is proliferating local access, trusted sources, available local news foundation. American democracy keeps citizens educated, motivated, sent to vote, and serves indispensable check on government power. Our internal link is statistically verified. Shaker 14's article compares changes in civic engagement in cities lost in newspaper, and that did not over the same period. The data indicates civic engagement dropped significantly even after controlling for alternative explanations. Lend empirical support to what many already believe newspapers are vital institutions in democracy. Advantage 2 is big news media. Giant consolidation leads to ideological reporting, fueling polarization and misinformation. Johnson 21 free media is particularly tied to democracy. More newspapers ensures as many voices as possible are heard. However, consolidation moves in the opposite direction. 5 conglomerates or 9% of the media mergers a lot for consolidation happened after winning antitrust approval from the Justice Department. Larger the giant spread, the more possible it is for smaller outlets to stay afloat in other industries directly linked to voting patterns as media conglomerates helping government to grant antitrust approvals. Media giants shape public debate to bolster entire ideologies, looking further than Fox, the smaller the political controls the news, so narrow the info reporter media giants cartel relationships between differences reporting are minor neurotrust to be biased by corporate interest. The erosion of media makes polarization inevitable. This erodes epistemic commons and render societies unable to respond to existential risk. Rattenberger 21 communities survive digital psychological warfare. If you're in the internet, you're voice and never minded every sentence target victories included legitimate election, implosion, civic discourse, hatred, armed force, never worse than the same. Then raising conventional wars or destruction of societies under siege becoming difficult to divide as democratic government becomes possible because people have no means of making sensible. It can be hard to achieve trust in governance, the downward spiral of trustless decision making, and problem solving show this the social system class society has been teetering engaged made widespread rapid communication and media partition with propaganda public based on information, particularly media sources population data demilitarized zones is the highest magnitude issue handling 21 fragmentation gets polarized party forget that it is urgent escalation conflict becomes impossible because conversation is no longer possible because the human species face deep existential risk. We value the fault mechanism for managing present risk unintended consequences of modern based ingredients food cybercrime pollution natural disasters saturation genetic experiments financial markets scarcity water and energy pandemics genetic engineering AI inequality nuclear chemical and biowar. Climate change also by the over proper set planetary scale living on autopilot becomes difficult. Genocide can happen again, may have global consequences. Can we constitute global resilient community? Can avoid this house without self-canacity and we must evolve. Communal resistance involves accepting dissimilarities, but arguments are different positions. Only possible groups and long monopoly truth must overcome polarized fragmentation. Mass media concentration is the root of misinformation and radicalization. Assessment 21, the rights of the capital root cause was by media colonial assessment news coverage from the government for more consolidation. Media ignoring expanded to share media's adverse implications never been more dramatic or urgent. People radicalized so far right insurrection did so in an active chamber. The chambers out of media consolidation, finishing out competitors and standardizing content. Our internal link is statistically verified. Martin and McCrane 19 local newspapers are declining given the importance of news and jargon politics is worse, and we present the underlying cause nationalization, polarization, politics coverage, these data set comparison, clarified stations, other station fund acquisition, led to increase in coverage of national politics, these mental, local ideological sensitive to the right guard, newspaper competition, associated ideological diversity, acquisition by national conglomerates, substitute ideological unified content for local focus, and ideological diverse content, the root consequences for campaigns, issues, election outcomes, escalation, changes, sentence, news providers, consolidated outlets, produce content that favors the owners, the outlaws, local newspapers guard against political polarization, Tofton Hussein, not only seen the draft of local news contribute to polarization, partisan political organization full of the outflow of closure of local news outlets will offer an slanted perspective of closure of local newspapers associated with significant decrease in split ticket voting. American search national news report through partisan conflict local paper variety convincing based repeal varieties and these we can't grant fast anymore because we don't share. And if we live in silos, solvency, the Newspaper Preservation Act immunizes newspapers from antitrust law that has directly resulted in the decline of local daily papers applying antitrust. Misguided competition or 19 due for daily newspaper industry source how to given continued popularity, need accountability, reporting, IP, electrical quality, and less about papers, IP should be repealed and competition occurs through rigorous enforcement, antitrust, merger, consolidation, rejecting naysayers, believe in interest turning newspapers into giant source attacks, misguided newspaper ability. The internet sites redistribution newspapers for local national news, promoting competition, ensure future local newspapers not be a harm to health instead of competing in the solid newspapers live off of monopoly profits that cutting quality newspapers continue to appeal to readers because they save transaction costs of sifting through internet sites, experience resilience data, exclusive content and physical closest readers just local newspapers, court-defined newspapers constitute their own markers for antitrust. Online media should not be immunized newspapers from antitrust. The media's reducing competitiveness buttressed by the MPA sites suffered significant negative flights and civic engagement. The antitrust newspapers issues and more competition, newspaper innovation, diversification rather than consolidation. MPA antitrust immunity create best daily papers. Antitrust immunity kills incentives for newspapers to innovate. Kobayashi and Right 20 antitrust essentially considered how newspapers survive. Immunity enables efficient business models. Without MPA, competitors would have to seek alternative methods to survive in the market, such as innovation. Immunity allows papers to seek competition and survive without making improvements to business. MPA failed to save papers. Antitrust immunity severability to antitrust susceptible, preserve outdated business models, slow innovation response to changing economical and social realities. The plan, the United States federal government should increase prohibitions on newspaper joint operating agreements and those newspaper mergers that result in undue concentration in local markets. Only competition produces high quality reporting. Sucky and Green's newspapers or news are quality difficult to determine in isolation, even after being consumed in news channel. May claim to be fair, but consumers may be ill-equipped to ascertain veracity. Assertions competition laws consumers to judge quality because they can benchmark one first reporting against the other. Less competition, diminish quality reporting, another mark failure, self-censorship, journalists discuss concerned about loss, independence, falling concentration, media gatekeepers, laying for prevent no outlet for unorthodox speech. That last card is marked at unorthodox speech.
Just pulling up the plan text. Okay, are you good? Does the plan text make these joint operating agreements per se legal?
No.
Okay, so they're not per se legal. Understood that. Does the plan make media, so like media interlocking directorates illegal, or does it just affect newspaper mergers?
Yeah, it's just about newspapers.
Yeah, no. So I'm talking about mergers that happen between companies' boards. So like boards of directors that, serving on more than one company.
Yeah, that's a separate proposal. The F is not about that.
Okay, your evidence discusses why that affects local markets. Both first two cards on the second advantage say that those directorates are specifically causing.
It's not true. If you're talking about our evidence that's using the example, we did read a card that's like an empirical study that uses like Sinclair TV stations to show why consolidation in media generally is bad for polarization, but the plan has nothing to do with that study.
Okay, yeah, we'll go back and we'll just rehighlight your Evan on that. But in terms of the CWS, does it affect it in any way?
I don't know. It uses current antitrust standards. It expands the scope by limiting an immunity, the Newspaper Preservation Act.
Okay, got it. But it doesn't change the consumer welfare standard broadly in any way?
I don't think so.
Okay, what type of media giant, do you mandate that media giants structurally separate?
No, the plan doesn't specify a remedy. You can read your you have to break them up thing. It's not very good.
And yeah, I was asking for like counterplan purposes. So what happens if a company is found to be engaging in this undue concentration in local markets?
Well, the plan says newspaper mergers that result in undue concentration in local markets. So the merger would be denied.
Okay, so merger would be denied. So existing corporations that are already merged in these agreements and exist as newspaper mergers would not be changed.
Well, our evidence is all about local newspapers. So the plan opens up competition in local news markets. And most of the problem in local news markets is these joint operating agreements that are immunized under the NPA. So what those allow is for two newspapers to stay technically separate, but combine their operations and fix prices.
Yeah, I'm asking about
advertising rates.
I'm asking about advantage too. Your cards talk about how Google, Amazon, CNN have all sort of already comprise 90% of the media. What evidence do you have that these local media chains that you might somehow lead to the emergence of would overtake Time Warner, ABC, ESPN, Pixar, etc.?
Last card, Afzal's Tofton Hussein on advantage 2. First card, Abernathy on advantage 1, as well as Tofton Hussein on advantage 1.
It says it might decrease political polarization. In a small degree, it doesn't say that it
provides a trusted source that people can fact check against, so they can watch Fox and then say, does this line up to what my local newspaper that I know I trust is reporting?
We're going to take prep. Okay, guys. So We stopped at 5:40. Grace is sending it out.
Okay, the 1 and C should be sent. It's 8 off, advantage 1, advantage 2. Okay, is anyone not ready? Northwestern, you're good. Okay, everyone's good. Okay, great. First off is topicality, the scope of antitrust laws define its goal, attempt to meet current goals by banning practices or implementation. Question GCS, no date competition research considers broad areas for implementation. Second scope of research on consideration competition law implementation covers the application competition laws to achieve the goals of competition policy. Scope research question about which policy objectives should be pursued by competition law, which should be delegated to other fields of competition law abuse to protect privacy info, inequality or environmental effects. That means the app has replaced the consumer welfare standard breakdown in 21 year advertising to replace the objective of the consumer welfare standard by goals to antitrust policy requires even saying consumers are also standard creating fundamental trade-offs on consumer willing to rights. Consumer welfare is defining characteristics go negative for limits and ground only change goals creates economy and legal decides avoid antitrust should consider the app topic raise to tiny exemptions and technical change with no core ground next to calculate antitrust capitalist world 19. I do feeling like competition background physical ways in case argument goes to think about alternatives such as ideas this little detail comes from day one competition is itself major causing saving costs and allowed other competitors when consequence of competition was access to other parts of the web social estimation hard committed over and over again capitalism goes through phases you don't be one in favor of the other competition produces a monopoly company the whole point finding its monopolies well as long as you have capitalism as reproduce or merge into incentivize the other networks of the whole and get rid of the established competition capitalism problem going about it is the solution capitalism causes extinction climate and capitalism 21 climate inequality degradation heat waves wildfire flooding of its extinction disease in other world possible transformation the only end of capitalism can provide the solution to extinction body hunger, hyper exploitation, capitalism, not stop it. Genuine solutions can be based on the market, voting neg to endorse global movements, but not in all in 15 studies, real focus on policy implication, orientation, function, service, of technological changes, status quo, reproducing class analysis, break the change between research and policy, by orientation, not done to bottom of majority 99% of completely alienated housing first or public health research with labor unions, opportunity to address new grassroots stakeholders. Next, the court's counterpoint in the United States federal judiciary should increase prohibitions on newspaper joint operating agreements of those newspaper mergers that result in undue concentration in local markets. Next, the states counterpoint the 50 states, territories, and nations should uniformly increase prohibitions on newspaper joint operating agreements of those newspaper mergers that result in undue concentration in local markets and increased funding for profit, nonprofit, and publicly funded news enterprises, digital startups, as well as newspapers, public and commercial broadcasting outlets, and ethnic media, and create and invest in artificial intelligence-based counter disinformation framework and require disinformation enforcement for private corporations and host a tiered democracy summit on issues included but not limited to anti-corruption, authoritarianism, and digitization. Their evidence concedes it solves new deserts and media giant consolidation. We read Blue when we see Abernathy and 20 without increased money for support for nonprofit, and publicly funded news enterprises, digital startups, newspapers, public and commercial broadcasting outlets, and ethnic media struggle to maintain a strong financial footing necessary to experiment with and develop new business models that will allow them to adequately address the local news deficit, solves advantage use, back up in 21, creating an AI-based counter disinformation framework. Government could engage in developers to prioritize AI to recognize nuance in social media and adapt to disinformation, enhancing AI models by analyzing false information in the context of social media source development, could have future-proofing considering impacts on digital human rights, adoption of shallow moral models, foster institutional capacity for direction models, public sector might explore AI training for personnel to leverage AI-based solutions for counter disinformation. Next, politics. China competition policy bill centered on semiconductors passes through fragile bipartisan consensus now, but Biden's push is key. Washington 318 were appointed by bipartisan consensus. Washington desire to spend more than $50 billion to bolster U.S. chip production auxiliary issues threaten to stall production. 9% of chip manufacturing also with the use of high risk of supply chain disruption. The ability to level these out can be China critical technologies like semiconductors already creating the need to support domestic chip production. Hoyer said he was hopeful the Biden stated for support for the changes to reconcile differences to put a bill president says as soon as possible. Plan drains PC and trades off partisan 21 but despite bipartisan rumors such as legally solidify Congress initial survival limited challenges how Biden will consider this makes competition law major commitment will have traded with other goals that man admin would give up stricter competition rules to achieve other legislative priorities for cars to invest political capital to administration when they were committed competition policy, then Obama, Chinese tech edge cause extinction chain in 19, AI 3D printing, genetic engineering, rocket technology, the IoT, 5G, space, cyber promises, benefit carriers, autonomous weapons could turn on creators, social extinction, 3D printing, based organizations, print, WMD, spurring arms race, and prolif, GE can wipe out entire classes of people, directed energy may undermine global stability. Audio greatest risk comes from risk autocracies when the tech race of China seeks master tech before the democratic core that should lead to Robert the balance of power, upsetting global strategic stability. Next is the sustainability counterplan. The United States federal government should allow the continuation of newspaper joint operation operating agreements of those newspaper mergers that result in undue concentration local markets under antitrust law only if the outcome of a sustainability assessment determines that the sustainability benefits of such practice outweigh the sustainability harms, and issue guidance on such assessments. It competes. The counterplans regulation on prohibition. What is infinity difference between regulation and prohibition? Former contemplates continuing with the latter implies the entire cessation. The counterplan solves and key to sustainability. Open and 20 sustainability conduct can be sent through analysis that the advantage brings sustainability within the traditional competition framework. This can fine tune the current toolbox and design a competitive investigation. Sustainability assessment enables biodiversity protection. Enters in 22. Imagine a competitive restraint helps protect biodiversity valuation by future consumers. The high or mirroring increase scarcity decline by ideally to pay mind. However, since such a point offered by benefits to lock the constraints and reassess in the future when an option consumption leads to irreversible loss of biodiversity, repercussions of their assessment competition assessment. I open up towards sustainability extinction. McCarthy 18 as expected to accelerate humans versus similar fate humanity. Phase uncertain future losses become accumulating plants and animals are close to extinction, moving towards the cliff. Benefits biodiversity, hard oversee food, climate, atmospheric conditions, resources more depend on ecosystems, wildfire, crucial to water, and can mitigate water crisis, environmental clean air carbon sinks, and protect from natural disasters. Next is BizCon. Antitrust law can't be distinguished. It hurts businesses. Roger 20 antitrust enforcing court rule evolved through precedent by journalist courts. Example, common knowledge adjudicator model for disadvantaged attributes ability doctrine provides doctrine noticing coming quantified huge surprises. Force could accelerate development, change the scope of interest after President Biden. The court such intervention is rare, likely brought specifications for beneficial conduct, evolution of prices, support movements, moved in internally consistent direction. Lower barriers would lead to many cases pretending this fit and interrelatedness issues. A more approach regulatory agency foster more advantage and then antitrust, unpredictable legal shifts, wreck business confidence. Came in 21 business investment is full ramp of growth. Will sustain recovery. Companies ramping up as they grow more confident. Robust investment will be key after stimulus and reboot things. Executive crazy comment. Less than 30 out of businesses will understand the strategy and follow and plan around that. Economic decline cascades. Mavic in 21 second. Depression will have implications for global security, coupling and global crisis. And enables one resistance to will and then another full-line crisis everywhere with US and China rebels will be felt. Think of debt-laden workforces, nuclear and chemical plants with resurgent accidents, catalysts behind World War II, depression and history often creates itself in cemetery for puzzle balloon effects include Air One War, US military competition over Taiwan, SCS, Korean proliferation, Indie nuclear war. Next FTC GA Bedoya will be confirmed, but it's narrow. Rich 1118. All four current FTC administrators attending hearing by President chart of support for Bedoya is likely to be confirmed, although we committed references to reviews, Lee, Cruz, and Sullivan's latest extremist tweets. Most questions related to Bedoya's expertise for the line between the parties themselves. The votes he consistently supported relying it and tried companies like facial recognition. He would support balancing FRT and hidden lack consent of the collection share data without limits. If confirmed, he would help reduce tensions. Plan triggers backlash. Jones 20 prosecution antitrust cases inspires a menace lobby against selective visual and enforcement agency targeting courage with tall attention to bunch of pathos to lobby to Congress. FTC depend on good relations with Congress to control the budget and counteract hostility where if adversity affects constituents. FTC's nebulous relation with Congress demonstrate the political coalition's favor and bold enforcement of volatile, unpredictable, and investment opponents mobilize legislation and intervention to cause ambitious enforcement measures to founder derails nomination. Murphy, when Bedoya gets a chance to assess the agenda of Bedoya would end a 2-2 split and give Dems a majority of Bedoya confirmation. 99% of assessment was in policies pursued by Bedoya has written about facial recognition centers for the examine how closely Bedoya will mirror priorities established bad FRT causes democratic backsliding. Kendall Taylor and 28 surveillance significant and digital authoritarianism trying to demonstrate some massive scale perfect censorship of autocracy stripping all they look to follow the technological wave of authoritarianism but seek autocracy systemic backsliding tools are used switching back will address new tech. The US should ensure US entities are not only used to such a facial recognition. US must lead global norms for use. This means get this right at home, creating a model people worldwide would want to emulate. The advantage one, other countries' authoritarian governments do not care about US losing local newspapers. They have no idea that Maryland's local newspaper was lost as a result of consolidation crisis. Globally, they don't solve local and 19 citizens in the streets, suggesting the Marxist crisis economies of Iraqi social unrest. Authoritarian states will keep up their pressures. Political polarization, weak institution, advanced democracies, global demand for equal access to prosperity, democracy, only system perceived capable of delivering it. Moral causes. World 21 Europeans think US is working underprepared. Biden will have to unable to halt decline insurrection. Raise questions through Trump will be departing. Raise questions about the long-term threat to US. Irreliable. Biden will me follow him. Allies are looking for COVID riots, police brutality, civil rights. Europeans signed their deal with China. America can't control China's nuclear. Korea and Iran. The Q makes collapse inevitable. Blanchett and Green 21 storming the Capitol. Images are stubborn. Neither public nor allies could shake representation. American decline. Allied leader questions wanting to reliability. Bob be overwhelmed. The Capitol police and incompetence. Allies who rely on treaties for their security. No, nothing is automatic. And Americans elected Trump. Allies know where their security crisis ultimately rests. No link to default risk. Gao says there's an association between reporting and accountability. Not that it's key or causal. Corruption is also low scale. It cites Bell, California. That's not key to overall capital. More newspapers don't solve climate infrastructure resisted by the U.S. and other countries' emissions outweighs. Quote, solves megacity sustainability quick. In 18, conducted research and data collection for solution to couple the problems of waste management, energy and production, high efficiency anaerobic digester to convert food waste by goes as water efficient, developed classification technology to convert solid waste into syngas and biocar, wireless air quality sensor network and monitoring of emerging contaminants by water, drone technology, and risk assessment, sustainable solutions are applicable for medic cities around the world, maintaining environmental sustainability. Nothing makes now key. Shanker evidence is citing 2008 data of the last 2 decades should have triggered the impact all causes to mega cities and advantage to circumvention, conservative courts tech enforcement, other forms of media thumb, query, blue, 1AC Johnson, and 21 more television stations, more editors, more writers, more independent local media owners. No reason now is key for polarization. It's been happening for decades. Consolidation is not a recent phenomenon. It doesn't solve misinformation. Trump supporters who think the election was stolen will not change their mind amid reading their conservative newspaper, which just cements their pre-existing beliefs. The national big media is more prone to care about facts and be more liberal. The problem is demand, not supply. We read Blue, Martin, and McCree 19. On the other hand, it's also possible that the local coverage are primarily demand rather than supply driven. Age of increasing nationalization election, dedicated coverage of local politics may no longer be as valuable since what's thought it was changing new direction, attributed to cut down, which may accelerate the influence of such demand size shifts. And tons of all causes, gerrymandering, immigration, the two-party system, the filibuster, all fuel greater polarization. And I'll read the mega cities alt cars card crib 19. Cities suffer from regional vulnerabilities include facts that one of the world's greatest cities can feed itself, all rely on fragile transport chains. The more the population go to the mid-century, the more vulnerable mega city failure is hard to predict. Okay, I'm good for cross-legs.
Okay, you're good. Court's counterplan. How can the court get rid of the Newspaper Preservation Act? It's a statutory exemption.
The court would strike that down.
Okay, and that competes with the plan. Why?
Because the plan can't be the court.
Why?
Like we'll define different words in the block.
But as of the one and
we think that antitrust requires Congress, prohibition requires Congress, anti-competitive
you didn't say any of that. The politics DA, this bill in 2 different forms already passed both the House and the Senate. It's in committee for reconciliation. What evidence says that Biden's PC is key to that?
The Washington evidence assumes passage in both the Senate and the House. It says that differences have to be reconciled, which is why Biden's PC is key. There's concern in the House.
It says the first part, it says differences have to be reconciled, and then says Biden stated his support for both chambers to reconcile differences because, like, duh, he supports it. But, like, is he really sitting in the committee meeting, like, hashing out the differences between important pages of bills?
It's really important for Biden to be resolved, especially when it comes to reconciling differences, because it's possible that House Democrats are going to make changes to it that are perceived as too liberal, that makes Republicans not support it. And so it's important for Biden to be involved in the
what reconciliation procedures has Biden been involved in so far for other bills?
Like the ones that have happened at the start of like the last year. Like it doesn't matter if Biden's been involved with other bills because we've read evidence, and obviously if we extend this, we'll read more evidence in the block that Biden's involvement is necessary.
Cap K, what does the alt do to newspapers?
The alternative nationalizes them.
It nationalizes them. So what happens? What's to prevent the government from controlling?
So the alternative creates a combination of local journalists and researchers along with national researchers and journalists to produce news. It puts them through a process of screening for disinformation and basically.
You said it puts them through a process, but that process is controlled by the government?
That process is controlled by the government.
Okay, so we've read a bunch of cards that say that like competition of ideas and diversity of opinions is necessary to prevent like government tyranny and corruption. And your answer to this is
that the version of the alternative would be a committee of journalists that to some extent have those discussions and that polarization and discussion prior to the publishing of the newspaper.
But you've said that what they're allowed to say is controlled.
But also, like that would be
what they're allowed to say is not controlled by the government. The committee is headed by the government.
It's also way net better because right now media is not necessily accessible to everyone. You have to like
the difference between
the New York Times subscription. So it's net better for that to be a communal good.
Well, what's the difference between the two things that you said?
There's no difference. It's just like an additional reason why it's good for that to be something that's publicly administered, where the media is accessible, and newspapers are accessible to everyone. But
I didn't ask the question in a good way. Whatever. What's the status of everything?
Conditional. The status quo is always a logical option.
We are going to prep.
I'm assuming everyone's good for an order. Local news, the big news advantage, PCWS, the state's advantage counterplan, the court's counterplan, the sustainability counterplan, the CAPK, politics, BizCon, Bedoya, or the FTCDA. Okay.
No,
Wait, sorry, I
sorry.
don't-
AU's is
Yeah, I
still
don't mean
downloading.
Yeah, sure. Oh, go ahead. If you need me to repeat the order, I got you.
I have the order on my flow. Okay, I'm good.
We're
Okay.
good.
Okay. Cool. Casey, just give me a thumbs up again so I make absolutely sure. Okay. Our call's good. Jen's good. Okay, great. Other countries do not promote a controlling of domestic local values by promoting domestic participation in local news itself. It sends a signal that shores of democratic values. No alt cost, and the coup doesn't controlling of local news interest, the integrity of civic participation. That outweighs snapshots. They've dropped the democratic legitimacy, solves extinction because it ensures Russian and Chinese aggression, and it sees off populism, which magnifies every existential risk. They say default, no, yes, internally the crisis and default yield spreads are increasing for municipal bonds, so local governments cannot remedy that. They have also conceded that they've also conceded the sort of internal component that says that green bonds are crucial to solve climate change, which causes extinction. The status quo, they say a status quo solves megacities. Sustainability, no, the status quo does not assume a collapse of megacities because local governments can't pay out their debt. Megacities solve extinction. Collapsing megacities puts an next to the threat. Failure causes a domino effect. Spark sudden migration causes the energy and food supplies for us to see some more such crib. Now is key because megacities are unsustainable now. Megacity alt costs are solved. Governments can pay off cities and vulnerabilities by decreasing the cost of bonds. Yes, municipal bonds impact, which was done above, and they dropped the critical infrastructure impact, which also costs extinction. The big news advantage. Conservative courts do not deck enforcement under fiat. Enforcement discretion resources and good faith implementation are key. Otherwise, the app always loses, which is bad for fairness. 2, we have evidence proving that the plan is administered in good faith. And other media does not thumb local news a valuable, robust bulwark because it's a trusted source of news that revitalizes domestic participation in political infrastructure. Now is key. Polarization is happening now, which means that the app is crucial to resolve that. Local news is the bulwark against misinformation, which was largely explained above. The problem is not demanded; it's supply driven, and there aren't any alt costs. Local news supply better information solves. Again, this is just an analytic. Yes, no alt costs was said above. Misinformation impact and polarization terminal impacts are conceded. Go to topicality. We mean what constitutes a goal is arbitrary, in particular to a sector. The goal of newspapers is to permit cooperative agreements and joint ventures. Definitive changes that goal scope and seek set of the area dealt with by court laws, because Rossi online. The competition law, equality, filter with law, scope restitution, discover competition law, other values, quality to amendment, the laws enforced, nor the independence of quality of the law is batted by exceptions to the immunities. Crucial on 19, the handbook is given the interest is just this give the interest laws, this give the defined in terms of exceptions to the immunities, statutory, non-statutory doctrines, roughly fed application, any set of laws preferred one predictability. It's the authoritative APA handbook on the meaning of antitrust scope better than their daisy chain definitions, and the case list is predictable. You can look up the list. 2, Brown exemptions are core best negative leak units. Most literature locks and regulator states ground functional limits and other limiting words like prohibit locking ground recidivity, competing determinations, race to the margin, states counterline permutation, both permutation to counterline 50 safety out of issue, uniformity is not in the literature, seals the one you see and makes debates about stupid modeling advantage. First plank is COA. The court already ruled that the NPA preempts state antitrust laws. Pat gets 15. State lands are getting validated equal protection by granting antitrust. The court holds the NPA prevails over any inconsistent state antitrust law and could constitutionally be applied to get the antitrust exception to JOAs. Other planks fail. Antitrust law is key. A, consolidation leads to news testers, ideological reporting, political polarization, and misinformation. Multiple competing news outlets are necessary for accurate and furious information. That's Kobayashi and White, Horton and Abernathy. Antitrust is key. Schultz 9. The needs to be treated as the antitrust receive legal protection. No country can reduce efforts to create communities more than one local newspaper diversity and Democrats are the U.S. president of the many newspaper diversity. It's approximately for diversity and environmental publicity. The number of independent news sources when corporations continue allegation managers is critical. B, newspapers are credence goods, which means discerning their quality is impossible without adequate competition. That's stuck. Funding fails. Pre-sale of a newspaper bailout will be irreparably damaged. Be jeopardizability function possibly reluctant by the hand of some of the rest of the strained individuals. The government and moderates bailout will corrupt the defense. Even support provided without restriction domain. Partiality will be offended. Evidence can be seen in corporate ownership newspapers will publish content critical of their parent companies and destroys innovation. Disinformation planks fail. News is key. Our evidence says it's the root cause of radicalization without competition in markets. People can silo themselves in rabbit holes of misinformation. Summon for democracy fails without domestic backing. Newspapers are key to functioning American civil life. The court's counterline. This is obviously non-starter as of the 1 and C. Prohibition to both. Prohibition to counterline. Agent picks or voting issue. They steal the 1 EC offense on the antitrust blocking topic. Counterplans without a solvency advocate or voting issue. No comparative literature. Kills fairness. Conditionalities of voting issue. It's used to we see encourages running out strategies which kills fairness and education. This doesn't solve the app. It's stupid. The NPA is a piece of legislation. It can't be rejected by a court. If they do, it links to all of the certainty stuff on the sustainability flow, but it also gets struck down. The sustainability counterline. Permutation both. Permutation to counterline. Permutation to the app. And the United States federal government should allow the mergers that result in undue concentration in local markets under antitrust law only if the outcome of a sustainability assessment determines that the sustainability benefits of such practices outweigh the sustainability harms and issue guidance on such assessments. Picks or issue seals 1 EC substance and forces us to start over. Now the counterplan does not mandate the plan because it's subject to sustainability assessments. That interests a big news. Lobbyists co-opted 21 news media last hosted meetings with lawmakers who reported the DFCA would a carpenter exception to news companies political civil laws proposing Nixon the was never about helping small newsrooms. Nixon supported the act after Hearst, political consequences after Hearst, and enacted Hearst condors Nixon politicians hand on change laws and given corporate rent seeking the JCP would create a big media control in the name of small and local newspapers will not benefit. No bright line for what counts as environmental benefits or sustainability. And green antitrust is a slippery slope to accepting other activity. My bad. Sustainability antitrust, I guess. Shinkle and turn 21 from long cartels defaulting. The other forms of market power and companies promises. Let's switch sustainable production number of the promises. Issue production is which plans for the trade off stand navigation number control and enforcement other distractions sustainability into a dominant firm that is politically counterfeit legal certainty is key. Kendrick 13 legal my tool speeds on certain legal process make it sphere if you be liable given ambiguities because this side they would not refer to be illegal. Attorneys would speak a scope of a speaker self-censor ambiguities make speakers some certain laws which a speaker may be deterred. No net benefit, no spillover. Newspaper mergers don't impact sustainability. It won't be used for other things. It's also backwards. Shingle and True 21 economic literature provides no ground for believing restrictions of competition when it incentivize sustainability. Competition induces companies to reduce sustainability. Regard corporation skepticism. Cut the card at skepticism. Go to the cap K of 1 framework. Wait, the plan against a competitive alternative. Key to fairness and clash. The plan is a locus of a predictable offense. 2 case outweighs in turns to K. Securing independent media freedom is necessary for democracy and combating misinformation and polarization. Both of which do the all three. It's sustainable. Su 20 capital already passed official for catastrophic. I take it needed to capture carbon seed to blow the best skills from motor capital. Also ensured otherwise food, water shortage, scientific needed to capture and to improve innovation for Robert Smith. Guards the manufacturing of EVs means subsidies to go to the capitals. 3 reputation to both solves in the old fields that the AFP Chesney. 15 less love media reform unit labor environments people journalists educators librarians parents if the left do not disagree who are authority which left to control be put in the hands of citizen journals. The left can never consider alternative media such as media will always be on the margins because media giants have greater resources. Most important is to change media policies. Corporate media power directly reduce left critics or resistant constitutions but proceed performance of the right concrete tables of it all. Otherwise people don't have any idea what they're fighting for. Cut the guard at fighting for 5. The alternative must be private. That's the regs answer I read. The regs answer I read above. Go to the politics.
I would read one card about that.
One card about. Okay.
Yeah.
And media has to be private. Priest 11. A public newspaper bailout would irrelevantly damage media. Democratic functions box. We would like to have. This is the same card as I'm.
Oh, okay.
Go to
Sorry.
politics. Yeah. The AF's a high visibility win that unseats the agenda and generates PC show in 22 in today's territory infrequent 82 news by part. Fighters union opportunity investment by part basis standards criminality news ensuring by the small media receive competition for political reasons fighter should receive to ensure passage basic consolidation and record approval the party needs to report beginning increasing visibility by urging class promoted sell neutrally fair other bills thumb Peterson 330 chance was leading after Senate Congress basket beside the bill remains unfunded installed behind the best scope bills the bill spread fast winners win Madeline 11-9 Biden showed downs with his to win after 6-3 success after the line is where trust turn the corner when you succeed and everybody sees something done and creates momentum and isolation does stop positive advocacy lobbying for something but when all in made false accomplishment but the results of leaders coming together PC not key Biden himself is not pushing Leary 3 but it's listening on topics and governance of 200 industries at the British Congress to resolve a differences in past legislation and boosting competitors. No, in fact, there are two different bills. None of their cards say that there is an internal link between the merged bill, which doesn't exist yet, and competitiveness broadly. The Viscount DA concede the impact. It's a disadvantage to the alternative Viscount low market 329 growth loss moment in the world. You can only and manner impact and not the best law just got some more evidence on discoveries some of the lowest since 2020 all four economies flows in the U.S. service real innovation and supply chains prices and growth. The biggest question we've revenue gives a side incentive capital service towards slower growth. Ukraine obviously thumbs Antitrust now should not need for substance links to spill over Pride 14. The media industry different consolidation media constitution media regulation policy should not person different which is well reductions of the Democrat process. Media regulators are becoming aware of center active government analysis insufficient regarding regulation in media. Big media created
Just
the
skip that card. It's not
polarization makes Biscount recovery Guerrilla 21 political polarization result in Miami policy volatility disorder recovery hostility and political gaps is systematically supposed to be distortion in the economic to economic trust defense expectations importance of polarization for transmission of equality politically distorted expectations of private dose linking polarization uncertainty and weak recovery business confidence is nonsense. It's a made up indicator by the Chamber of Commerce. The DA confirmation inevitable but so is GOP delays Sweeple Keegan 4-1 but it was they have got the nominations under the current 50-50 political split but always final briefly cannot happen for April 5 and will likely be later no lengthy for the stunts for controversy introducing market competition and the new sector is largely popular advocated by conservatives to cross the link turn I read on politics above. Biden will recess a point day in 222 Republicans will hostage for majority disrupting controversy helping agencies across government DMs going to enable Biden to recess a point Bedoya politicization inevitable Cernak 19 when some of your politicization they in gain imagine a bribery close to president opportunities when benefits limited to U.S. interests change when debates convinced of the U.S. political question on regulation is very considerably of the U.S. Biden Bedoya and we saw the trivial impact about democratic backsliding. He won't ban facial recognition. Rich 1118 he would not support banning facial recognition since some assist with public safety and healthcare. Back up to the Biscount DA. Business confidence is nonsense. Hiltzik 18 uncertainty. The Chamber never showed concerns appointed to 2000 during a volunteer in Trump. One would think uncertainties would soar. The Chamber thought this time to make part of the public is legitimate. People told uncertainty wrote researchers search newspaper uncertainty and create an index. Hiltzik is cut index.
Okay, are you good for cross-ex?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to start on the scope of what the AF does. And when I see cross-ex and like several points throughout the 2AC, you just talk about local news and local newspapers. But then it's like the Schultz evidence that you read on the state's counterplan is about like the media industry broadly. The Johnson evidence that we re-highlighted on the second advantage is also about like dominant tech platforms, like TV. Does the AF change like the way that television networks and like the media industry broadly operates, or is it just about newspapers?
It does not do anything with TV.
Then why have you read evidence that is key? How do you solve then?
We solve because local news are crucial to remedy the larger media ecosystem. Local news provide a trusted source of news media for local people. Like for example, in a region, the trusted local newspaper is sort of a cornerstone of democracy and ensuring civic participation.
Okay.
Those are eroded as a result.
I want to know why that's important,
because
considering that like the local news sources in Southern Florida are definitely saying that like the election was stolen. They're just confirming what Fox News has said. I don't understand why people turning to these trusted sources mean that there's no more polarization if they're just repropagating like what their localities support.
Because that's actually not what's happening. So because a bunch of our cards, like Abernathy is really good at saying this, consolidation within local news has sort of led to the proliferation of ideological worldviews in local news. Our argument is that we need to deconcentrate those. So there are a plethora of views in local news markets, which would correct the South Florida example you brought up.
Okay, different question. When's the last time you read a newspaper instead of watch TV? Like, why do people turn to the news as opposed to like
TV stations, Facebook, Twitter. Like, why are
The
those
last
things?
time that I read one was 2 days ago. I did it before the NDT to take a break.
Okay, well, you're a
might be
rarity.
literally- you might
RF says that
Like-
the majority of reporting actually comes from local newspapers. So TV stations pick up on reporting that local newspapers have already done, as do big conglomerate chains. So as long as there's competition at that base level, then the rest of the ecosystem is fine. That's why our evidence likes to compare it to use biological analogies and says that local newspapers are like the keystone species of
Okay.
the whole media sphere.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. The politics DA, the show and evidence. First, I guess I don't understand why you think the F is comparable to this piece of legislation. Like, I looked it up. It has a couple co-sponsors. It creates a 4-year safe harbor from antitrust laws. Like, is the plan like a couple years of harbor to get this stuff situated and then allows consolidation 5 years from now? Like, why do you think that this is similar to the plan?
No, you can take it.
So the reason why this card matters is because the only reason why that piece of legislation is popular is because it's an antitrust exemption in order to compete against big news. So the idea is that Congress really hates big news. And in fact, all of the people who oppose that piece of legislation would
Okay.
also love the AF. So it's bipartisan because
Well, I have a different
because they think it's bad for local news.
Okay. We're gonna take prep. How much did we have? It's in the chat. Okay, we had 540 starting that. Okay, we stopped prep. I'll put it in the chat. I'm just gonna run to the bathroom.
I already sent the 2NC if people want to pull that up while Nina's in the bathroom.
I'm back. Sorry.
Cool. The order is, wait, fuck, where'd it go? Okay, T, CWS, the CAPK. Sorry, the state's counterplan. CAPK will be in the 1 hour. And then the local news advantage.
So it's T states and then local news.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, is anyone not ready? Cool. Northwestern does not meet our interpretation. What I see across the space clear that they don't change the goal of the CWS. CWS is the consistent goal of scope, which proves that they're not arbitrary. That George 20 antitrust law benefits from long-standing support for the consumer welfare standard. The Supreme Court has consistently acknowledged that consumer welfare goals, consumer welfare serves as a common language. The scope debate one, it defines what antitrust law should be dedicated to protect. That scope is currently defined by the consumer welfare standard. That means the affirmative must change the legal standard of consideration. So that competition law now has a different policy objective: inequality, environmental effects, or privacy protection, for example. But the plan instead enforces current competition under consumer welfare standard, which is a question of implementation of factors, not scope. Only our evidence has an intent to define and excludes theirs with a direct comparison between the two terms. Two, scope means goals and values. That's 18 at the policy level. Competition excludes the questions of the normative scope of competition enforcement. The question is, this competition problem has become common, and these papers seek to outline the scope of competition laws, goals, and values. 3, the plan also highlights the word core. That's Miller and Abbott 21. The Supreme Court emphasized consumer welfare as the core antitrust policy goal. Number of scholars concluded that consumer welfare is not equivalent as scholars support range of objective concerns as a result of his studies and endorse the legislation. It depends on consumer welfare and is likely to do harm in the right writing in the scope of what constitutes a violation, would create uncertainty to assign weights to fairness and labor, would create confusion not consistent with the rule of law. 4, that means the act must change the consumer welfare standard. That's Radu 18 of vocal group scholars and actually has been called for demanding the consensus that the antitrust should focus on consumer harms and benefits instead of broadening the scope to address social challenges. And today's neo-gradations of advocates explaining the scope of antitrust to address the small business inequality, regional decline, wage stagnation, privacy, and political reform. Exemptions, they're bad for limits. 1, NEF could just say we meet X activity is currently not tried because its negative impact doesn't count as commerce, which is like the largest exemption in their under their case list. 2, any substantive exemption is T, aka there is a First Amendment exemption. Michigan didn't remove it, but they wrote an act that just doesn't apply to hiring cartels in the rabbinical market. There's a state exemption. NUSAF didn't remove it. It just says it doesn't apply unless certain approval was given. So each thing on the list is like in tons of apps, not a single affirmative. 3, antitrust commissions determined that the list is too long to research. That's a 406 immunities exemption. AMC has taken evidence on each item along with statutory immunities and exemption equally. King Lobbyist commission does not have the time or resources to do this. 3, there's no negative ground or link uniqueness without our interpretation. All negative wins on a dissent on this topic can be attributed to link evidence that specifically discusses a change in the scope of the consumer welfare standard and shitty affirmative no link debating only accessible literature base. That's Phillips 18 consumer
however, made headline, which is not always the true in antitrust. And we have heard a great deal of op-eds on TV and so forth. And regarding the consumer welfare, this is an important time for it strikes a middle ground that starts to rush the 18 to consider the current debate in the U.S. and the desirability of changing the benchmark of antitrust enforcement assessment that the debate stems from the narrow scope of biases that argue in favor of widening the industry consumer welfare, the decline in competitiveness led to an array of proposals from moderate to condemnation to take numerous counter arguments on the U.S. debate. New Brady movement sees Shapiro, Kahn, Crane, Solonsky, and Hovenkamp. The predictability and precision stuff were more precise. Neither of the pieces of evidence have intent to exclude exemptions. Has two contradictory definitions proven by NU and Georgetown. Read different case lists, which proves the argument that they are not core to. No link. Definitional predictability is priceless. No evidence assumes when there isn't a contextual definition, you should use a limited definition. They delete it because we will never have a card that says the literal entire resolution for a made up extracurricular activity. Our interpretation is not better for affirmative ground. The advocates are explicit. That's Greenfield 20. The populist critics have explicitly called for antitrust on reliance on the CWS and testified before the Senate and argue that the court should formally abandon the CWS and reward antitrust roles cannot be recovered without genocide consumer welfare. There are numerous solvency advocates. They are writing now that Store C20 at the time of the publication, numerous scholars, politicians, and commentators advocating the antitrust law return to its revolution framework and gain traction, and at least one national political party has included neo-Brandy's sentiments, and legislators introduced legislation that will all devolve into a reasonability debate. So I'll answer it here. That was limiting ground offense. Anyone here re-articulation demands arbitrary judge intervention to go off of what you personally think is okay. That green line's out of front of use and doesn't solve limits because it defaults to individual judge interpretations of what they think debate should be. Now, the state's counterplan at the top. I'll send out a full list of the planks later on, but I'll probably be adding some permutation. Do both. It links to the net benefit, in the 1 and R. Both. I don't know what Grace is going to choose, but in terms of the politics DA, it would link because it would involve the national government in the passage of a bill, and in terms of BizCon, it would still engage in the broader antitrust policy and not regulation, which is what we're amending the counterplan to be. Permutation to counterplan severs the mechanism of the federal government. Will adjust the first plank of the counterplan to state that policy will be done under labor law and through non-antitrust means. There's no reason that antitrust is key to any component of the plan text. They have no evidence that the federal government has an incentive to preempt. Congress avoids federal preemption of state antitrust law. That's HLR 20. Federalism is so relevant constitutional value, and the core presumption of Congress is not only the intrude on state sovereignty. An example is a presumption against preemption validated by Congress's choice to refrain from preempting state law and antitrust, and the state attorney generals and increasingly taking antitrust action in high-profile matters, and the federal government has declined to pursue state law. States bring federal claims, state claims, or both. There's no preemption or contravening precedent. That's Hildebrand 14. The dual antitrust affirmative results in the consistent application of the Supreme Court has consistently held that antitrust do not preclude or preempt application of similar or more far-reaching state antitrust statutes, and enforcement does not overrun a full of the dormant commerce clause. Now, certainty solves consolidation and misinformation. Antitrust is not key. One, there only one AC internal link card that functionally says these news enterprises investing should be key in countering disinformation networks. Actually says that the counterplan would solve this. One AC, 2 AC Schultz card is god awful. All it says is that Dean Alger and this random Ben guy, among others, have noted in the 1990s that a number of independent news outlets and that they believe that the application of antitrust law would be critical, not that would be important. It's a quote from an individual person, not a reason why antitrust would be key in all certain instances. We'll add another plank, provide stimulus checks to American residents who purchase a subscription to their local newspaper. Issue is local newspapers can't hire advertisers and they don't solve the demand side of abuse. That's 1 AC Abernathy 20. Vast majority of the dollars that closed in recent years have served impoverished communities that never realigned the economic floating out years after 08, and many of these dollars also own not only their own local advertisers who went out of business in the wake of the recession, but also the readers who could no longer afford to pay for a subscription. 3, funding does not fail. Their evidence assumes that the government would watchdog the newspapers. 2, new planks. 1, invest funds in research and data collection and managing issues of waste and energy production within smart meters. 1, in CPEC evidence is solvency advocate explicitly states that the state monitoring of sustainable assessments is the only way to resolve ripple effect from existing failures. The second plank, without encroaching, they should do the first plank without encroaching on the media's ability for open journalism and preserving independence from government restrictions without mandates tied to new funding. That explicitly solves all their arguments for why the government would serve as a watchdog, because they would be explicitly banned from interfering with any of the independence of the journalistic practices that they're funding. Now, it does solve advantage 2, and there's no reason it destroys innovation or why funding wouldn't work. 1, there's a huge issue with both advantages is that they solely solve the supply side of the news market, but do nothing to target the mass issues on the demand side. How the fuck does the affirmative reverse the incentive to listen to populist media sources like Fox News? Also, why who reads the newspaper? When's the last time you sat down and read it instead of actually watching CNN? Also across news that varies by state. I promise you that the Pensacola local newspaper is spewing the most populist shit you've ever seen, and they have no national oversight to check on that, which proves that it's an independent dissent of the affirmative, and they only influence future mergers, which means that they can't resolve an existing issue of ideological reporting and misinformation, which means none of their solvency deficits are offense because they have no capacity to solve them either, and it cuts both ways too. They can't solve current mergers, and they do absolutely nothing about the 5 media giants that their evidence cite. They talk about AT&T, NBC, Universal, Marvel Studios, News Corp, and CBS. How do you solve any of those? It does ban future mergers, which means that small local news companies can never merge, which means that they're terminally fucked because they'll always be stuck behind the big mergers that have already merged because they have no reverse way to solve the existing mergers in the status quo. Now, the The last argument was pretty incoherent. It's something about a summon of democracy failing without discussion. You have literally no evidence to support this. We read a piece of evidence in the 1 and 2. We'll read more on the case that specifically talk about how populism is happening globally and they have no capacity to solve it without an actual intergovernmental discussion on it. Now, go to the local news advantage at the top. Populism 1. Reading your daily newspaper doesn't solve global populism. The crisis globally across Latin America, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, a bunch of populist governments that are shutting down news now, and because of social unrest and political polarization broadly. No one in those countries reads the signals of other countries. That's just not evidence. Populism, internal link evidence, is about offering aid to the developing world. We're inserted here specifically about Western alliances targeting environmental issues in the environmental world, which is something that they do not solve. Populism is structurally inevitable. The Boris election, Trump, and all of the other things happening across Poland and Germany. That's outcome below 20. The economic oversumming and the climate interest in the American institutions collapse, and nor can policymakers hope to be discontent really from the loss of manufacturing jobs, including Hungary, India, Poland, Trumpism, Johnson, and the French, and Turkish and Erdogan demonstrated a complete unraveling of political order, cross-cutting economic trends and globalization, automation, the social changes, common institutions that were unable to, unwilling to protect suffering. There's cultural shifts, immigration, economics, a bunch of other things that have no institutional checks, economic resentment that is happening now in the context of the election of the French right and Turkey, all guarantee fundamental mistrust, and they have no capacity to solve it. The next argument is the megacity stuff. Huge double bind for megacities. Either the status quo solves megacity sustainability sensors, mass research and development on the current shocks that they're experiencing, or they don't solve. They don't have any evidence that they change the structural issues plaguing megacities. Cities are suffering from a range of vulnerabilities, including how the world's greatest cities can feed themselves, which or offer vehicles that transfer food, but it's sustainable now. That's Lee 17. It's sustainable megacity. Luxembourg. It is straightforward to determine whether the city is sustainable. The smart cities in Copenhagen, Barcelona, and Singapore, and the sustainable transport, recycling, and housing, and effective governments and megacities are thus called on the exceed the threshold of the population set for no other reason. Negative externalities are not proportional to the population, and the rest of it measures to reduce emissions and illustrates the ability of public policies in changing negative externalities. Green bonds impact, they don't solve it. That's board off 20. The virus shows why there won't be any global action on climate change, and like COVID-19, the climate change is the ultimate collective global problem. The U.S. as a country researching to their nation's little benefit in avoiding the climate change, climate impacts unless they do the same. And the COVID-19 may erode the public support and stronger climate action, and there is an inverse relation in the U.S. and the concern about the environment and economic conditions, concern about growth and caused by China to pressure back the environmental ambitions. Disease doesn't cause extinction. That's board 20. The global pandemic falls short in the threat of humanity, and the D for biological theory suggests the pathogens are unlikely to reduce extinction. These include anti-correlation between infection and lethality, extreme rarity. They can lower the 40% tendency to become less violent, and also virulence. On this side of civilization, recover 50% death rate was not enough to precipitate the collapse. It gives us a reason to believe civilization is likely to make it through the future of events, even if global strongest against the existential risk. Margaret, existential risk.
Oh, we're gonna take a second of prep. Oh, wait, can you actually can you first send
Yeah, I'm gonna
yeah.
for sure. Do you just want them combined with the 1 and 2 planks?
Yeah, and also the ones that you said you're modifying.
Yeah, I'll make sure to do that.
What do
I'm
you
gonna spit this recall out, but thank you.
I sent it. I don't know why the font looks so goofy, but they're all there. So
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna take a second prep.
Okay.
Okay.
Um, okay. Good for cross-checks?
Yeah.
Okay. TCWS, what is the goal of antitrust in the newspaper sector?
The goal of antitrust, the argument is that the goal of judges when approaching antitrust is to preserve consumer welfare.
Why not immunizing conduct from scrutiny in the newspaper sector?
But because that's just like not the goal of antitrust. The goal of antitrust.
What makes that not the goal of antitrust?
That the scope is defined as consumer welfare.
Again, this is circular. I asked you a question, what is the goal of antitrust? You said consumer
Yeah,
welfare. I asked you why is consumer welfare the goal of
Read a
antitrust?
plain
You said
text.
it's
You
because
could
the
read a
scope is
plain
consumer
text.
welfare.
Yeah, you could read a plain text that replaces the consumer welfare standard with something that prioritizes.
I think I understand I think I understand the case list under your interpretation. I'm asking what makes that case list predictable and not arbitrary.
That we've read evidence with intent to define and exclude that explicitly states that the CWS is the core scope of what defines the goals of antitrust.
Again, what is okay, I think I've made my point. The state's counterplan. So you amended the counterplan so that it's about labor law. Does the first plank of the counterplan, does it contain a balancing test to assess whether concentration exists in local markets or not?
No.
It does not. So what
not the
mechanism?
antitrust law, labor, like, so the.
Oh, I get, wait, no. It actually, I guess it maybe does because the way you worded the
Yeah,
counterplan.
but I think you're referring to the balancing test in the context of antitrust. The
Yes.
counterplan does not engage in a balance, like a comedy balancing test. It specifically just assesses if there's concentration in local markets in the context of labor law.
So then
and
how,
then
again, what labor law mechanism do you use to determine whether or not
the
concentration exists?
reason I
You're
amended
clear
it
about that?
is the reason I amended it is because your 1AC evidence specifically talks about how joint operating agreements are an encroachment on labor in the context of who is.
Again, but none of our cards say that labor law is an adequate remedy. So,
Yeah, none of your cards say that antitrust is one either.
okay, that's
Like they say it's
not true.
You don't
That's
have a
not true.
conclusive card that's like antitrust is the only to this no shot any other area of law would solve, because obviously why would this only be specific to antitrust?
Because of the balancing test. Putting that aside, second plank about funding.
Yeah.
A number of 1AC cards and the 2AC priest card that I read have said that media independence is what's important to maintain democratic values and make sure that investigating reporting occurs at its finest. Why does funding newspapers ensure that they are independent from the government that they are holding accountable?
Yeah, that's the second edition in the 2NC. You can spot it in the email that they can provide the funding, but they cannot inflict on the media's ability for open journalism, and they cannot use funding to require government restrictions or mandates.
Okay. Our priest evidence.
We're gonna take prep.
The one in ours being sent. I'll give the order right after that.
Oh, no, we're taking prep. I don't know if that.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it's not sent then.
Okay, we have 5:15.
Okay, now I'm sending the one in our. Okay, the one in our doc should be sent. If everyone's good for an order, it's the CAP-K, the sustainability counter plan, the courts counter plan, the BizCon DA, the Bedoya FTC DA, and then politics. Does anyone need that again? Okay, does everyone have the doc? Okay, awesome. Concede the perm just has a competition. We're not going for sustainability counterpoint. Concede the perm just has a competition. Picks no reason to reject the argument of the team course counterpoint. Conditionality is good. When neg flexes new after neg is reacted. The only condo gets to overcome the research and prep deficit. 2 logic to align it was the one and C proving the counterpoint disapprove the plan is good. The rational interappeals education predictability. 3 that didn't disclose that close clash pre-run prep and leads to bad ass reject the team 4 not devoted the most one. What we did made it impossible. Dispo links their offense and doesn't solve other counterpoint has a solvency advocate so it doesn't link their evidence but it links to them. They don't have one about the plan. No ground loss can generate offense. Key to creativity. Critical thinking. Hard bit is good. Reject the arc not the team. The agent counter plan. The unique reasons why states counterplans are good. We're on the state's counterplay, but it's predictable, real world applause, and possible for the to generate offense against the key to real world education. Reject the argument of the team. The BizCon DA concede. Business confidence is made up. They don't have access to offense. It takes forever to solve polarization. The impact is about quick decline, so they can't access it. And Ukraine thumbs the dissent turns. Any offense means the economy declines. Antitrust now cannot be cross applied to the DA in the one area because the 2AC did not provide a warrant. If the 1AC says what other antitrust is coming, then we get new answers. Bedoya DA concede. Confirmation inedible. No link, no offense. But they drop the internal link, which takes out the case. FRT is the largest internal link to Democratic backsliding. Takes out the populism scenario. Means that autocracies can target minorities globally, which outweighs the after politics. CA tech leadership solves extinction. One advances in AI, autonomous weapons about tech. All guarantee extinction. It's developed in a Chinese-led system. Independently, Chinese tech edge caused nuclear transition wars in Asia, reshoring U.S. semiconductors are key to innovation, insulating the industry from shocks. That's Canadian Washington. 2 emerging tech categorically outweighs significant. In 8 we face greater from emerging technology. Extinction, low pathogen, more accessible nuclear weapons, and the self-replicating release might cause extinction. Nanotech and allow self-upgrading machines for the ecosystem. Advanced XOA invention. New weapons are taking 500 trillion times to play. Come the stakes are 1 billion times greater for extinction than for nuclear wars for disaster, killing less than humanity. The species could never recover 3 turns. The economic failure, losing the competition to China causes polarization, city collapse, and populism. The first argument, the plan's not popular. Antitrust legislation upends Biden's agenda. 1 picking fights with the big tech lobby by using antitrust and winning over pro-business Congress members requires time and PC to trade off with passing legislation to counter China. That's partisan. 2, it's an opportunity cost smaller. In 19, the opportunity cost for hearing marginal issues, whether people should enjoy exemption from antitrust is high. Congress sacrifices time, money, and attention. 3, antitrust is a poison pill. Tech will fight the plan. Hilton and Rodrigo and 22 big tech's allies message are the lobby makers abandon antitrust legislation. UC take giants and full steps to counter China policy makers express concern that could take advantage of our adversaries. Ukraine and force industry talking about points among lawmakers for Europe and pending conflicts with China. You don't have the same to be assembling Starless tech companies at the same time you're fighting tech war warring. Antitrust will give Beijing the upper hand in tech arms race. Tech giants waving up arms with the antitrust fight. For the other legislation is not the same. It has a couple of co-sponsors, was introduced over a year ago, has gone nowhere in the Senate and provides temporary reprieve from antitrust. It's not the same as the AF's massive departure. And this highlighting shows that their evidence is misleadingly highlighted when talking about bipartisanship. It's referencing infrastructure, not the legislation shown in 22 last year. In order to bipartisanship and essential long overdue reform designed to modernize America's infrastructure was signed into law. 6, delaying quick passage is key. Price in 22. The supply is fallen. Immediate crisis prevention with lead factories closing domestically. Food outbreak, natural disaster, political instability, semiconductor facility, even just a few weeks. The supply chain remains fragile. Essential Congress faster planning as soon as possible. Biden proposed to 2 billion every day. We wait today. We fall for the behind inventory from 40 days to less than 5 days in 2020. And inventory smaller in key industries. And the no thumpers. 1 is Biden's top priority. That's Washington. 2, the House and Senate are clearing times for committee. Other legislation is signing price in 3. It's the next big item on the Senate's agenda. Terminate injunction in 322. The Senate is in work on legislation deal with China. The bill takes on new urgency. Biden called for the bill procedural steps may take time. The bill timing. I see that should be a very president with November sending issue. November something the president very much wants to see for the warrant is a budget. It doesn't pass. Schultz 28-bit. Republicans demanding Biden go too big for national security and shooting on defense spending. Progressives are urging president to do everything to resist increased defense spending. New fiscal year doesn't begin for 6 months. Doesn't overwhelm. 1 passes now flatly. 323. Executive joined Biden for pressing for action. The legislation is support, but there's some holdouts. Johnson questioned new additional policy whether the tariff standards decried corporate welfare. 2, it's not a sure thing. Clark 322. The Senate forces long star bill to promote chips to prepare to inch legislation for Biden press for quick passage. Schumer said the vote legislation committee bill Republicans rally against the bill as a priority for Democrats. This passage would be in for Biden. I know the votes will not be unanimous, but parties are going to have to make compromises. America will have to be better off bipartisan. Final product 3. Their evidence sucks that says that it passes Senate. Now that it's definitely going to pass. And winners don't win. Schumer and 21. Unlikely will hurt Biden's future. Wins asking for too much. He can blame victory. Nobody ultimately until we see the economy. PC is finite. Can increase only decrease for the immense turn. 12 PC is finite. So depreciation support is lost over time. PC is key. 1 Biden's press for the SODU and Washington has been putting constant pressure on Congress to make it a top priority. That's one see Washington. Biden's getting involved to convince Congress now. Nichols 320. Biden's listening former Trump officials to convince Congress to pass legislation bolstering America's semiconductor industry. Biden's trying to depoliticize and add urgency while we bring together both sides. One of the aisle every day. We fall behind the worst case scenarios. Nothing happens. Biden and Cameron have been hosting weekly events to press Congress on the Chinese competitive bill to PC is key on semiconductors. Jordan and 21. Congress has a lot on their plate. Semiconductors tonight. People on the back burner. The Biden needs to take seriously the challenge. Ignoring the political capital provided by structural energy forward will put national security at risk. 3, their evidence is awful. It's 2 lines long, and their evidence post states it. They say no impact doesn't have a warrant. They have conceded it. The last argument is the 2 bills don't solve. Yes, they do. And Boga and Klein and 320. Semiconductors are critical to keeping America's economic defense edge. China is master to key technologies and supply chain. Whoever gains technology edge will hold a military advantage. China's not yet power plant. Making Chinese invasion would create a supply chain crisis. Funding would support new semiconductor research and fabrication. The US might not be dependent on a single supplier that could cut off any time by the PLA pledge to make China self-sufficient in semiconductors. PH part of our whole sector competition with China. It's key to solve Hicks and Graves and 22. Our inability to produce chips, long-term supply chain, key security at richer military space, cutting edge systems like F-35 meet them fundamental or DoD capabilities such as autonomous systems, AI directed energy, hypersonic weapons. Congress does resolve differences between USIA competes with bipartisan critical legislation, manufacturing outcompete. China fabs already on warning. A more than 90% utilization will minimize vulnerabilities in our supply chain. We do not have much time to delay. The second advantage, sorry, I didn't include that in the order. It's garbage. It presumes that polarization, the rise of Trump, the Tea Party, Freedom Caucus are all a result of Southern Florida local newspapers going out of business. Even if the media is key, 1AC cross-sex and 2AC cross-sex was clear that the only impact is local newspapers. The Johnson evidence that is the first card on this advantage is about the broad modern media industry. Same with their cards on the state's counterplan. We re-highlighted it. It says that newspapers, but also more like television stations, more editors, more writers are all key. They can't solve. No reason now is key. Polarization has been happening for decades since the rise in the early 2000s. The 2AC says, but it's happening now. That doesn't disprove that your impact is not unique for the last 2 decades. They don't solve misinformation. Local papers are not better. I included a screenshot of my local newspaper talking about how voter legislation is like fake and doesn't actually harm people. And Trump supporters who think the election was stolen will not change their mind amid reading their local conservative newspaper. The national big media is more likely to care about facts. Their evidence is about demand, not supply of newspapers. That's a Martin re-highlight. It says the declines in local coverage might be a result of consumers just not wanting it, not consolidation. That's their evidence.
We have 5:15. Okay, we're done. Bro, we're both sending out docs. Sorry about that. That's what it is.
Yes.
But while that's happening, advantage 1. Advantage 2. T. Bedoya DA. States counterplan. Politics. Sorry, I just need to line up like the flow cells.
Which like doc is first?
Well, T is gonna happen.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the one that Akash sent is just T cards. Excuse me. And the one I sent is a T card and all the other cards. So slow. Hey. I feel like I've putzed around enough. Everyone is probably ready.
Well, causes populism, democracy, impact one that assholes in the U.S. That's a terminal impact that we definitely access to. Conceded that the U.S. is a model, but that model is broken only because of consolidation and news. Third, our evidence conduct studies and is reverse cultural populism. The key internal link is because of lack of social cohesion, ability to debate and agree over facts, which newspapers the crucial part of. They say that we don't change structural issues. Our internal link is about unlocking funding for mega cities and critical infrastructure. Local newspapers check corruption by reporting on local governments. So the only ones that can do that, it makes local governments more trustworthy borrowers, which lowers costs of borrowing money, means that they can invest in things like critical infrastructure and mega cities. Just sustainability. Now their evidence is about Barcelona, U.S. mega cities. Their key to sustainability globally. Yes, green funding impact. That is about. They also conceded that critical infrastructure impact, deployment, and Armstrong evidence is not just about mega cities. Both of those culminate in the next station, and they have no defense. Second advantage. So a lot of rambling, but their examples are just grasping at straws. They have no evidence. Arts is fantastic and says the decline of local newspapers is the root cause of polarization. They are keystone species. That was a cross-ex argument about how they percolate up to the rest of the news system. Local newspapers bad now. Pensacola, Florida, whatever. Is our argument is because they don't face competition. But our evidence again cites reverse causal studies about the acquisition of newspapers and the effect on political polarization, and they have nothing. Topicality, we meet their interpretation of scope under they misunderstood our argument in the 2NC. The goal of antitrust the newspapers is immunizing them from scrutiny via the NPA. Their scope interpretation just says that scope is a goal, and then later they have regards that says that the CWS is a goal of antitrust, but it is not the only goal. Any other reading of their evidence is extremely arbitrary, makes it impossible for the AF to win because you can't tell what it is or isn't a goal of antitrust. Our interpretation is the scope is the extent of the area dealt with by the core laws. It is bounded by exemptions and immunities. It is more predictable for the AF than neg unless arbitrary comes from the ambit of the scope on antitrust laws and written by the ADA. It's better for limits and ground. Also key to AF ground because changing the CWS is extremely reality against the literature. No limit standard one. We solve it better. It's hard to say. We meet because almost every activity is not decisively commerce. Exemptions are the clearest limit on the topic. Two subsets are also topical under their interpretation. You could just tweak the standard in one market. The list is too long. No ground. Only interpretation ensures uniqueness because it makes antitrust apply somewhere. It doesn't apply now. The neg is winning. TA links and rights counterplans based on immunity areas. CWS is not the only accessible limit base in their evidence doesn't strike the middle ground. It doesn't assume the ass will just read super small standards that tweak it in just one area. Core means essential. It has zero technical meaning. Wick Junior. A9 course not structure based on definition where core meaning certainly invoke critical various on the other definition violation English are basic essential. They are not more precise. Only RFS intention to define and exclude comes from the ADA scope handbook. There's just pieced together. One says scope is a goal, but CWS is not the only goal that proves our reasonability argument. It's more arbitrary to intervene from them. The state's counterplan doesn't solve the F1. It's struck down, bringing the counterplan under labor law. Doesn't solve it. The MPA preempts state laws that are contrary to its purpose, i.e. its purpose being to allow companies to combine and enter into joint operating agreements. If they prohibited that, even under labor law, would still be preempted. Removing the MPA is key because it's what allows new papers to evade antitrust scrutiny, stifling innovation. The counterplan can't do it, even if preemption is uncertain. It deters prosecutions. FC9 advocates right and whether federal law should be a resident search surrounding preemption issues. Characteristic news organization finally sale on news claims. NPA preempts the rest of 83 privacy rationale for FTC regulation having included Congress searches for federal antitrust regulation for necessary apply federal preemption antitrust enforcement as well. Mark and as well, there are other claims don't solve
getting stimulus doesn't mean anything if there are no local newspapers for them to subscribe to, which also proves our funding deficits go there now. Funding local newspapers fails. If my doc would let me go where the thing is, even if unconditional government support destroys the independence of the press, no one wants to fight the hand that feeds them. It's a vector for corruption, bias reporting, and bakes in polarization. That's our priest evidence, empirics proof. Even the perception of dependence on government credibility undercuts independence of the press. It answers their new blank sheets are and 11 intentional bars. Government provides good copyright press independence can press under government without depending on it for funding government see control of the press content even if the possibility might influence the press works that editors more motivated with themselves with government to secure funding and competitive atmosphere. The main factor we believe the press is bold and government even if credibility government poses unique rights by virtue of that size and financial muscle. The counterplan doesn't solve because states need funding to do, or they say plank increase waste and energy and smart cities monitoring. States need funding to do those planks, which is our internal link. Getting cheap capital requires low bond yields, which was on the case, and only our internal link solves the. There's no reason the counterplan solves the rants about advantage to better. This is just more of the stuff that I already answered on case. No evidence that states can solve the global populism stuff. Their evidence says the USFG should hold a summit for democracy. Antitrust is key. The counterplan doesn't access it solely to control competition to news markets, which is necessary for ideological diversity and innovation. That's a Kobayashi Johnson, Toshin, Stuckey, and evidence. Finally, permutation do both. Maps of any residual offense because their net benefit is bad. Their net benefit is bad. Forgot to go to the FTC DA quickly. We said confirmation inevitable, so that solves the alt cause. It doesn't take out the case because the FRTs and key newspapers can contain downsides. The politics DA, no. Bill doesn't solve emerging tech, no. Overview, the ultimate version. They end up with we watered down in other countries. Overwhelmed, they won't agree with the U.S. on norms, so we can't solve it globally. Their impact is all about Russia and China. The plan is popular. They have no evidence about the plan. Recent legislation like GCPOA proofs debates have been super cordial, and they wouldn't be like picking a fight with big tech because they hate big news, even small government. Big is good. Conservatives like the plan. King 20 tough economic space as well as generate whereby part of Russian income satellite interest federal law. No issue about tech and the law. America's capital destination, local news station, personal news station, free market side. But I live with the media see importance is spread Patterson pressure to lead one to conflicts local news see performance support have more solicit strategies and policies for the next decade. Now other groups are pushing to one and R has no cards about this. Not Biden. Their evidence doesn't say Biden specifically has to push. If he's called for bill negotiations still have to happen, what the hell would he even do? The bills in committee now. Do you really think his old ass is going to sit in those meetings and reconcile the two bills? Upscale 320 future makers, line time executives, and leading makers, scatter cross watching industry processes, lawmakers who shepherded funding close to finish like Chipper to meet with key administration officials. Needing overwhelms the link. Also very popular. Will absolutely pass. Peterson group. All their PC key cards. They all lie meaningless punditry buzzwords that are Frankenstein together. None says the bill will not pass without PC. The only reason it hasn't already is because it's not time sensitive. On high on Congress's docket. Nichols rate 19 probably what favorite use to go. Raising price of EC by price of figure for Biden to have go so Congress pass. A bill interpret direction industry gives momentum because we need to make American manufacturing structure. There's just arguments of the programs they have difference between important time sensitive. They're citing a tiny minority attorneys 12 states with private price support to pass legislation on minority streams like either party voicing opposition supply chain issues for everyone following recent updating RG gave all the future labor person areas agreement use as possible full choice funding. Finally, the PC has already spent. The push already happened. Their evidence is old. Both the House and Senate bills have already passed. They have to iron out differences in the committee, but none of their evidence Biden is key to that or Schumer chasing the 325 majority. The Schumer is getting the Senate version of the committee section whereby criminal confidence to iron out differences between their bills.
Okay. Sorry, we weren't muted. The orders, the state's counter plan, then advantage one, the small business advantage, and then the politics DA. I don't just disappeared. Okay, there it is. Okay, is anyone not ready? Cool.
The counterplan solves the entirety of the case without causing a massive distraction and cost in Congress that ensures a nuke war. We're kicking solely the first labor plank of the counterplan, going for the state's counterplan as an advantage counterplan with every other plank. The counterplan actually addresses the policy suggestions in there when you see evidence which calls for investing more in local news sources and actually solving the supply side and demand side of the news market in order to ensure that we are not incentivizing consumers to engage in media giants, but instead incentivizing them to engage in local news. They may have vague cards gesturing at a reason why the counterplan may not solve other impacts such as bargaining, but they have card 0 that ties a deficit to any of their 1AC impacts, which means you should default as efficient for your baby because there's no actual argument for why you shouldn't prefer the counterplan instead of the case. At the top, strike down is irrelevant. We're not influencing antitrust. We're passing any law that contradicts the current exemption, which means all of their uncertainty arguments at the top are irrelevant, and I don't have to answer any of those pieces of evidence. Stimulus solves the demand side of the market in the context of news. The combination of all the planks proves that there will be actual markets and local news sources that they can engage in because it's a combination of providing stimulus in order for them to engage with them and funding for those to exist, which proves that there would still be a long-term economy in which we are providing a demand and supply economy in which both sides are engaging in each other in order to provide more money for the local markets instead of for media giants. If consumers are engaging far more in the local market, then media giants are then not able to sort of take advantage of that market because there's no concentration if they cannot sell that to consumers. The funding deficits, they have no answers to our new plans. One, the Shizer evidence is just mishighlighted. It says that any financial support that the government provides cannot be allowed to compromise the press's independence. They highlighted it to say can. That's not what the card said. It's not tied to their impact about populism, and the counterplan obviously solves that cannot question by making it illegal to attach any restrictions to the funding provided, which proves that it solves even more so than the AF2. They have no explanation of low bond yields and no impact as to why we can provide funding for the disasters coming in megacities now. Their argument is that there are issues with megacities and the status quo in terms of transportation and action, but the counterplan short circuits that internal link by targeting them directly, and there's no reason why we need to solve megacities directly because they have no actual answer to just solving the demand and supply side of the financial market in the context of news. Now, the populism stuff, it certainly solves advantage to and any external impact that you think they're even winning to megacities. It's the only way that countries don't dismiss U.S. attempts outright because they're viewed as hypocritical. The counterplan engages all of the 50 states uniformly in a broad offensive and defensive strategy to address all of the global scenarios that are causing disinformation, causing populism, and instead it promotes democracy and multilateral forums. It actually builds trust in core democratic institutions and strengthens encryption, enhances different projects, and creates cybersecurity partnerships globally. That's your book in Brandon Evidence that was read in the 1NC, and they do not have a piece of evidence that explicitly speaks to how this would solve populism, how this would solve democratic legitimacy in the context of advantage too. Now, we don't give them any solvency deficit leverage when they don't have a case either. Nina clarified in 1AC Cross that the plan doesn't make anything per se illegal, but rather affects future mergers. They have just dropped that means that there's no way that smaller companies can ever catch up because no one can bring a case against the existing 5 media giants, but the smaller companies cannot merge. That's still a massively anti-competitive market since it has the Williamson-Berg local news attempt to compete with ABC, yet doesn't allow that local news network to merge with other local newspapers if it exceeds concentration, which proves that we're actually in a straight turn to the case. Permutation do both links to politics, and the net benefit doesn't shield. I'll answer the rest on that flow. Now, go to the small businesses advantage. You might be wondering why I'm only answering this advantage. It's because the other advantage is just a shitty impact scenario for the first that they do not solve, as was explained on the counterplan. Sons of solvency efficient with the 1AC that Nina is far too fast and loose with. One, the plan doesn't change the demand side of the news economy. The evidence conceives people rather read television studios like Fox News and CNN, which the plan does not change or reduce, and local newspapers are populist. 3, tons of all causes to polarization and populism that they do not solve. Economic resentment, Trumpism, the election of Boris Johnson, the French right, Turkey, etc. All are 5 good pieces of evidence that speak to why they don't solve any of their impacts. Only we solve megacities because we increase investment in megacities and broadly into green technologies. This evidence is not only about Barcelona, it's about how Curitiba, Freiburg, Copenhagen, so all are doing sustainable transport, recycling, housing to solve both of their impacts for disaster. Effective re-governance is happening now. Those methods spill over to other megacities, which means you can be confident that the status quo will find and that there's only a risk of the dissat. Now, there's no impact to warming or disease. What the hell is the 1NR's answer to this terminal impact defense? You drop both of these cards. It states that there's massive checks, including current efforts in geoengineering, 5G technology, and vaccine development, which means there's no terminal impact to any of their megacities offense. Now, go to the dissat tech leadership outweighs the AF. Now is uniquely key to say about extension from Chinese tech-led order. Polarization and partisanship has been occurring for decades, but now is the time for the U.S. to invest in semiconductors to prevent conflict. Advances in AI, autonomous weapons, and biotech guarantee conflict escalation. China's tech edge ensures nuclear transition worse. As a Jane in Washington evidence and categorically outweighs extinction level pathogens are far more available. That's a saber crew evidence and proves that we turn both of their terminal impacts on the case. That turns the AF drop that losing the tech race events a form of polarization and populism that decides U.S. reliance on foreign powers. It takes forever to encourage new newspaper sites to enter the market, especially during a pandemic, which means that there's only a risk that we outweigh on time frame. The biggest issue in the 1AR extends every 2AC argument without responding to the 1NR. You have to hold the high on a 2AR that grandstands on any of this. The bill does solve. We've read 4 cards and they have read 0. The legislation does allow the U.S. to win the tech race against China. It addresses the supply chain crisis and helps the U.S. leverage resources. That's the Limbon evidence from a couple weeks ago. We don't have to win. Either countries agree on, nor the U.S. will get the necessary technology and have more safeguards. The link debate. The plan signals a clear signal that antitrust is being prioritized. This would be the first legislative lesson in antitrust in the administration, which signals vast investment in political capital capital. The most of the one here is posturing. I don't know what more you could ask of this D7 than a 1 and C card that explicitly uses the term trade-off when discussing the plan in the bill. First, no matter the popularity argument, the delay link outweighs it was dropped. Doesn't matter if the F isn't polarizing because it takes time away from the focus of the Competes Act. Their evidence on the turn is not nearly as strong as they suggest and doesn't prove it will be cordial. One, the 2AC evidence is disjointed. The first part about bipartisanship is about infrastructure. The second part is about different piece of legislation. Two, the 1 year evidence is from 2020, doesn't assume highland polarization as it pertains to antitrust uniquely in the past year, make big tech lobbying, which doesn't make a broader recent claim about the AF and antitrust. Biden is pushing the legislation and his PC. I'll do that debate here. The 1 read evidence that is far more recent than theirs, is specifically the Washington evidence. It talks about constant pressure on Congress that is happening now. It says it's getting involved to add urgency to the legislation. He has been hosting weekly events to press Congress to pass the act. Uniqueness doesn't overwhelm. The 1 AR drops like 3-1 in our cars. There is support now, but the process of comparing differences between the House and the Senate is fragile and requires energy and time and focus. The 2AC evidence didn't even say it would certainly get passed, just merely reports it did pass the Senate. Jordan says Biden getting involved in the process and political capital is uniquely important for semiconductors, which is the key component of our interlink that they have no answer to.
Sorry. What did we have?
329.
screen is black. Well, do you mind just pulling up my flow and seeing if everything's there? Yeah, that's fine.
For sure.
Yeah, that is it. Let me. If you all don't mind, just give me a second to restart my computer because I think maybe blue screen.
I mean, if it is here, you can just use mine. If you
Yeah.
want to.
Second, though. If this doesn't work in the next 30 seconds, I'll just use Nina's computer. Sorry about this.
Is it dead, maybe?
No, I had it charged the whole time.
Maybe. Are you sure? Like each of those, you have to flip the switch on. Like,
This
are you sure
is-
it's actually charging?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure. Oh, Casey, are you attempting to speak?
Oh, we can't hear you.
Casey, we can't hear you if.
I can also not hear you, Casey.
Does this work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just trying to say you really should take a minute or two to get it set up if you want to. It's not a problem at all.
Okay. I appreciate it. My computer is just
Oh,
it is back on. It is working. So
Okay.
that is good.
And I'm gonna, in case it crashes again, I'll keep your flow instead of mine up.
Okay, thank you. Now my Word is not exploding, it's just opening every document that was present earlier. Anyways. All right. Okay. Okay.
Starts with the second part.
Okay, got it. I'm good now. The order is the local news advantage, the state's counter plan, and then the politics DA. Okay. I'm assuming everybody's good now. Great. The 2.0 is very good at answering and solving most of our case, but it's totally ignored a stubborn impact scenario about getting cheap funding to update aging infrastructure and a critical infrastructure impact. No matter how persuasive you think the 2.0 was, you have to vote on this conceded scenario that they did not apply any of their arguments to. You should not apply their arguments for them. That will be interventionary. You've conceded that critical infrastructure disruptions cause extinction. Any supply chain slip up or a successful cyber attack guarantees a blackout, a grid collapse, exacerbates ecosystem collapse, and climate change. Since we need energy to transition to renewables and worsens trade wars, poverty, and conflict, that's our Pamela evidence that wasted sad cascades are likely if supplier does not have the parts to make a power transformer or an opaque single source provided a faulty component for grid architecture. The grid could immediately collapse, but the sad is unlikely. There's no scenario for emerging tech causing extinction. That is the reason why China would develop emerging technology without safeguards. There's no evidence read in any of the debate about why the reconciled bill in Congress would, or why the reconciled bill in Congress would stimulate American competitiveness and magically compete with some of the biggest tech titans on the planet. So the net benefit should be small relative to the plan. That also always on time frame attacks on critical infrastructure are coming now, so that supply chain slip-ups can compromise the grid now, whereas the DA is far off because maintaining U.S. competitiveness is a long-term project that turns to dissent as well, because a collapse of critical infrastructure would immediately compromise U.S. competitiveness. Their advantage counterplan does not solve this, regardless of the claim that AU may have made, saying creatively cross-applying the funding plank to the critical infrastructure business, because no part of the counterplan text actually talks about the critical infrastructure impact at all in the 1MC, which means that even if they fund smart cities, that only solves half of the advantage, not the part of the 2 that is relevant. All of these alt causes are relevant, and all of these alt costs are relevant because are crucial. All of these alternate cost arguments about going to CNN or local news not being able to revitalize democracy are irrelevant, because even if you're a casual newspaper reader doesn't necessarily have that much faith in it, or evidence is predicated off of bondholders being the crucial interlink. They think that local newspapers are credible, which means that they think that newspapers are holding local governments accountable and are investing in critical infrastructure properly, which proves that bondholders are the only ones that are relevant to our interlink. Local news, however, is a bulwark to ensure a crucial faith because it revitalizes democratic participation. It is a cornerstone of democracy. All of these rambling in the 2R is totally and completely irrelevant. Now, all of these other terminal impact defense arguments are relevant because I'm not going for any of them. The state's counterplan, it solves none of the AF. The counterplan does not solve for our financing impact. The thesis of that is that local newspapers are uniquely important for creditors. If there are lots of local newspapers in one town, then bondholders think that it is safer to lend money to local governments because they know that local newspapers will report on corruption and secure their investments. But the counterplan does nothing to solve this. One, it funds the local news. They have no evidence that says bondholders would trust this. Think about it. Why would you trust a newspaper that your local government funds to tell you whether that government is using your money well or corrupted? It does not solve our internal link about lowering costs of borrowing, because the creditors will think this is just a Ponzi scheme. Even if unconditional government support destroys the independence of the press, no one wants to bite the hand that feeds them. The creditors won't trust the planks that make it illegal to attract restrictions to funding. Funding is a backdoor for corruption, bias reporting, and bakes in polarization. That's the priest evidence. Empirics prove newspapers rarely publish critical articles about their parent companies, and it destroys innovation because it props up old tired models instead of forcing newspapers to adapt to the online world. That means that they'll get outcompeted by lower quality, more polarized sources. This means that even if you think the other plank solved, the plank alone destroys credibility too. The demand side stuff does not solve. They give consumers credits to buy from their local newspapers, but have conceded that those local newspapers don't yet exist or are being immunized from antitrust by the joint operating agreement. So even if consumers are more likely to read their local paper, that paper faces no competition or is entered into a joint operating agreement with another paper that makes them way less credible. That means that bondholders won't trust them and they can't create a sustainable market. 3, funding megacities doesn't solve. The critical infrastructure impact was way different. States need to fund both, but can't get the money to do so without cheap borrowing. And also, the 1MC counterplan text was specific to megacities and did not mention a critical infrastructure that the 2 asserts. Go to the politics TA. The politics TA. This disadvantage should be 0. The biggest problem with it is that they don't have a card saying that a Biden pushes key. They have good evidence. They have good evidence that says that there is a bill in reconciliation now, and Biden was pushing for it before, but no cards about whether or not Biden is a crucial interlink. They have good evidence actually saying that Schumer and a number of other private industry executives are the ones that are pushing for the bill because they want America to compete sustainably, but they have no cards saying that Biden's political capital or the bully pulpit is key. Their cards say that the bill is in committee now, not that the bully pulpit is important in getting it across the finish line. You've conceded that there are a number of other groups pushing, but not necessarily Biden. Their evidence does not say that Biden specifically has to push because the bill is in committee now. Our 1 year of Prisco evidence says that executives from leading chip makers are already pushing, and they are meeting with key administration officials, which is in line with all of their evidence saying that Schumer and others are also pushing as well. Are pushing as well. Their impact evidence, the impact cards that they have read are also totally irrelevant and disconnected from their impact, because even if we simulate American competitiveness in the short term, that doesn't necessarily correlate with long-term American competitiveness as well. None of their cards are also describing the reconciled package about the House bill and the Senate bill coming together and that being able to simulate American competitiveness, which means they've read an incomplete aside from the one on C. Uniqueness also overwhelms the link, which the 2EC and the 1A explicitly said. Even if Biden does not come to the table, the senators and congressmen are meeting in committee now, and they are having discussions with which to pass the bill. It is extraordinarily popular. This are Peterson evidence. All of their cards saying that political capital is important. All of them say that Biden is the Biden had pushed in the past, not that he's pushing now, not that Biden is crucial to get it across the finish line, which I explained above. Our Nichols evidence says that it is an easy bipartisan victory for Biden, which means that even if there are quibbles in Congress now about the content of the bill, it will inevitably get passed. Also, PC has already been spent. He's spending on Build Back Better, which is what all of their one in our link evidence, one in our PC evidence is, which is what all of their one in our PC evidence is about, which proves that Biden is key to none of that. Our Kasten evidence in the one area says that Schumer is sufficient to push, which is in line with all their cards, which I explained above. The affirmative outweighs a massively mitigated DA.
Good day, Emory. AFTAC is coming.
Neg doc is sent.
The AFDOC is sent.
This is Tab. It's a 2-minute decision warning for Hannah. Thank you.
All right, is everyone back? Great. Northwestern, both of you all there? Cool. Congratulations to both teams. Really close debate, good debate. The decision is a 3-0 for the negative from Emory. All right, does anyone want to go first? If not, I will. Okay, give me just 1 second to pull up my stuff because I closed everything out. Here we go. Okay, so I vote there is a decent enough risk of the politics DA, a very small risk of the impacts the AF goes for. The impact of the politics DA, there's a big enough risk of the impact. I'm not really sure what evidence the app has that says emerging tech and China tech edge will not cause conflict escalation. So there's a very large risk of the impact. There's some form of biotech conflict escalation transition wars that will happen in the world of the DA. Tunar could do a decent, better job explaining that. The speedy passage arguments that I think that your evidence makes and the negative evidence makes, I think there should be substantially more work done for those. There's several pieces of evidence that set up the argument, and the tuner does make some arguments about this that are not responded to with the app, which is what ends up kind of effectuating my decision. There needs to be a big reason that uniqueness doesn't overwhelm the link because it passes inevitably. I end up voting that uniqueness doesn't overwhelm the link because it's a question of the speedy process happening, and by being able to use this PC that their evidence from the past 2 weeks speaks to, I think there's probably a risk that it doesn't inevitably pass in the long run. I don't think that's true in the short term. My decision here is pretty close. The uniqueness cards, the AF uniqueness overwhelms the link card. The Peterson card's the most recent one. It says that it's expected to pass, and there's broad supports for it. The Thumper arguments that I think that you have are probably the better warrants in that card, and they're not in the 2AR. The Nichols argument is from 3.8. It's about how it's going to pass. Ukraine gives it momentum, and there's bipartisan support. However, all of your evidence for the will pass arguments are there A, old, or B, do not say that it's going to certainly pass. The FPC not key cards, the Leary card from 3.8 just says lobbyists are working to push it. All of the cards that you have are just like what really short cards saying that lobbyists are working with it. The negative has some evidence that's really good and says that Biden is working to do it. The one card that I think is the best is the Nichols card from 320. It makes the arguments that the 2NR makes, which is about Biden's key. He's holding press conferences. He's working to get senators on board. So all of his arguments, or all of the AF arguments, I think are kind of overwhelmed by this one, or by this evidence, and also the Clark evidence, because it says that Biden's working to get Schumer and other people on board to pass the China Competes Act. And it also sets up those time frame arguments that the 2NR is going for. The AF internal link defense arguments in the 2A aren't carded and don't respond to the neg evidence. I'm going to go to the case debate first. I'll jump back to the counter plan. The case debate, the warming defense was dropped in the 1AR. 2NR doesn't explain what the warrants of the warming defense were. And the 2NR still doesn't say why warming causes extinction. This impacts the wash to me. It's probably the best one that you have going for you. The other critical infrastructure impacts, the only other one that was differentiated in the 2AR is the grid impact. And I'm not really sure why that causes independent escalation. The China scenario probably turns it. The counter plan, I'm not really sure why bond yields are comparatively better than increasing funding itself. However, I'm not really sure based on evidence why funding is better than bond yields. The 1AR kind of just asserts that bond yields are necessary. The 2AR provides a bit more context, but there's probably a risk based on the 2NR analysis that the counterplan doesn't solve. The counterplan does solve the internal link to the bond yields argument without getting to the bond yields itself. And the counterplan might not solve the grid collapse impact, but I'm not really sure why the impact outweighs that of the China impact, and I ended up deciding that there is a risk of that. I wanted to kind of go through the counterplan and case stuff a little bit more, but I didn't really have the time to. Once I ended up deciding that there was a decent enough risk of the DA, not very big risk of the case debate, I ended up voting neg on that, but there's some more things I'd like to kind of look at the counterplan that I want to do here in the next couple of minutes, just for explanation purposes.
Yep, I thought that the risk of the DA was pretty substantial, and that the combination of the stimulus checks part of the counter plan and the solvency arguments that were made on the counter plan and on the case in the 2NR were enough to outweigh the green bonds impact to the AF. I could talk about the DA. I thought that it, was reasonably large, but actually for me, the kind of bigger thing was I thought that the neg mitigated the case quite a bit. First, it just seems logical that if like folks get a an ongoing check in order to purchase a local subscription, that will create a pretty big incentive for them to fund their local newspapers. And if local newspapers are operative, then that provides enough kind of confidence for there to be low bond yields. It never, like that part of the counter plan, it seemed like I understand that there was a lot of moving parts in the counter plan, but it seemed like that plank didn't get that much attention. And it seemed like it was evident somewhat in the 1AC, and it seems logical to me. I thought that the AF's funding is bad for media turns were awesome. In fact, I think so far as to say that the part of the counterplan that funds media is like a DA it's like it's worse than the status quo by directly propping them up. But I didn't think that the AF really applied those turns to the stimulus checks part of the counterplan as much as you all applied it to the direct subsidization part of the counterplan. And weirdly, and just kind of, I guess, a side note or whatever, kind of arrived at a situation where I thought that the stimulus counterplan plank was good, and the other plank of the counterplan was bad. And so I kicked the direct subsidization plank and just voted on the stimulus plank. Whether like Judge kicked the plank is where we're at in 2022 or not, I don't really know. I guess just based on the context of this debate and the evolution of the counterplan and the lack of contestation about conditionality, it ultimately was just where I felt comfortable with in the moment, but I don't really know. Second, they had a solvency argument on the counterplan in the 2NR, and it was pretty lengthy. And the 2AR was, in terms of debating the case, was very impact focused and it's at least not to me enough focus on the mechanics of the case. And in particular, I mean, they have two different arguments, but one was the plan's not forward, or the plan's not retroactive, and it's only forward looking. It doesn't break up any of the consolidation that's taken place in the past, it just prevents it from occurring in the future. And that means that there's like mega companies that exist right now that are not going to be undone by the plan. I understand that you have some ways around it, but like this was featured in the 2NR, and just there's not, in my opinion, not enough 2NR or 2AR argument. And then the other argument was on the case. They basically said TV's key, not newspapers. And on the case, I'm not even sure if you really kind of addressed solvency. It was mostly just kind of like an impact style debating, focusing on critical infrastructure. And so just like making sure that you win the internal link to the case is pretty important. I think that there's ways to like work around it, to like say we're only going for our bonds impact, and therefore we don't need to win that TV changes. There just needs to be local media. That way there's confidence in municipalities, and thus we bypass some of your stuff. Like there's logical ways to explain how the case bypasses these things. But again, just like I think on a tech level, the 2AR needs to address it specifically. On the DA, the two things that I guess stood out for me were, one, on the tech, or again on the tech front, they read a delay link and the link wall, and in the 2NR they were like, hey, you dropped the independent delay link, even if it doesn't like stop the whole thing, you just push it off, and we're at an imminent risk of there being some sort of disruption to semiconductors. And so a lot of like, at least that deals with some of uniqueness overwhelms the link. And then kind of on just the direct mechanics of like PC key or uniqueness overwhelms the link, which I view as being somewhat synonymous. The arguments that the AF went for in the 2AR, I thought like they weirdly, like the AF argument started to like simplify rather than complexify over the course of the debate. Like the arguments basically by the end are just kind of like a roughly tagline claim that everyone agrees with this. Biden's not doing that much. It should be a slam dunk thing, and he's spent the political capital that he needs to. And there's like that is basically just directly refuted by a variety of negative evidence. Like they have a card that says that the president is doing weekly meetings with, it's assuming reconciliation, that the other entities that are being drawn in by the president. It's ongoing use of political capital, and also that it's like there is a lot of support for the bill, but in reconciliation, both sides are going to have to give something, and it's not a guaranteed thing. I think you would have done better if you tried to broaden a little bit and add nuance to your argument over the course of the debate, especially in the 2AR. Like kind of, for example, just drawing out like who's going to be the one who balks at the thing. Yes, both sides need to give a little bit, and there is disagreement, but ultimately there's such overwhelming consensus on the core issue of the necessity of funding semiconductors that no one's willing to walk away. And that this is kind of like there's many cards you could read, but like, or you could cite for this, but like the 1AR card that's like there's only fringe people. That's like, okay, there's Roy Blunt and Bernie Sanders who are maybe willing to stake out the position and die on this hill, but for other people, even though there's like ongoing disagreement, it's unlikely that at the end of the day they would ever be willing to actually tube the bill, as opposed to your argument, which I understood more, is just like everyone's already on board. There's not very much of a disagreement at all.
I agree largely with what's been said. I think for me, there was a bit lower of a risk of the politics dissad, because I do think that while there are negative cards that say that Biden is pushing, I agree with the AF characterization that those cards don't necessarily say he is necessary for the passage of the bill. I end up thinking that there is enough of a risk of the dissad to outweigh the case, because I agree with kind of the solvency issues that Casey isolated. I particularly think this argument on the counterplan is lengthy and repeated and in the cross-exes, but I don't think any of the off speeches answer it. Just about the like inability to get rid of, did I freeze? Oh.
I think you're good.
No.
Okay, sorry. Everyone else froze, so I thought I lost you. The inability to get rid of the large conglomerate tech companies that already exist and the way that they would affect the ability of local newspapers to compete. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the only like really novel stuff I have to add. I'll let you all ask questions.
I think we're good. Yeah, I think you answered any questions that I had. So yeah, Emory, if you all have any, feel free.
Yeah, so I was just gonna ask one question about, so I know Casey definitely thought the first blank needed to go away. Was there any other issues with the counterplan, slash do you think we should have just kept the like stimulus check thing going?
If I could just say, okay, so as it relates to like democracy or like perception of independent media, it seems like any funding is just gonna like completely hose that. Like the AF cards and that were just like, I thought they were very good. On the question of like bonds though, it seems a little bit different. So that's about like the credibility of the municipality and whether there's like a local newspaper keeping them accountable. And the problem with funding the media is like, the media is in the pocket of the government. That really assumes that it's the municipality that's funding the media, not the states. And so if, the entity that's providing the checks is not the entity that is being held accountable in this situation. And so I feel like there's ways to basically say like our actor is distinct from the agent that's being accountable. Their evidence assumes that it's the accountability is the same actor that is providing the funding itself. And that would have resolved, I mean, it would have helped. It doesn't help so much against populism and the other stuff that you were like maybe doing better against case-wise, but it would have been better against the specific scenario they went for.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for judging and good luck, Northwestern.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Good luck, Emory.